Hi there, thanks for joining. In this video I want to discuss and show you the differences between student quality paint and artist's quality paint. So first off, it's important to say that the student quality paints often are already very good quality paints because they are made by the renowned brands most of the times, and they contain already a lot of pigments and good pigments. This is a student quality paint. And this is an artist quality paint, and in Amsterdam Talens it is called Standard Series and Expert Series. And I know that for the English market that is a little bit confusing sometimes, but you could say this is just artist quality paint. You can see on the bottle which pigments this burnt umber in this instance contains. It contains PR101, and that in fact is burnt sienna. The burnt sienna pigment is in this. And then PBK11, and that means that's black. That's a black pigment. So this is this with a little bit of black. And when we look on the artist quality paint, we see that it contains exactly the same pigments, PR101 and PBK11. Now, the thing is, in the artist quality paint, they add more pigment. The student quality paint has less pigment, is maybe slightly more fluid therefore, and it sometimes contains a little bit more of fillers and stuff like that. So you could say the artist quality paint is more a kind of a pure paint, but therefore it is also more expensive, because not only are there more pigments in this artist quality paint, but also the pigments are ground more often. Now, of course, the question is, how important is that difference for most of us? So in general, I would say just start with student quality paint. They are great, but when you have more painting experience, then you start to see things more nuanced. So then often people start using artist quality paints. But that doesn't mean that you have to switch to artist quality totally, because you can also just start with some colors in artist quality. And also, so you can combine the two. You can mix them, that's no problem. And also you can, of course, do things like starting the first layers of your painting with standard quality or student quality paint. And then in next layers you can start adding artist quality paints. Now, because pigments are the most expensive part of paint, therefore the artist quality paints are higher in price. They're more expensive. And also, some pigments are more expensive than other pigments. So in high quality paints you often see different price tags for the paint. So a cadmium yellow, for instance, can be very expensive. A burnt umber or ultramarine blue, for instance, are slightly cheaper pigments. So there are differences in price. In standard quality or student quality, you won't encounter, for instance, cadmium pigments because they are expensive. And most of the times the whole range of the student paints are in the same price class. Now, is it all worth it? That's of course the question that we want to solve. And first let me say this, that it's of course always a bit of a pitfall to start looking for the best paint, the best brushes, the best canvas, etc, etc. Because the search for the best materials can easily become a kind of a, how do you call it in English? Procrastinating. So it's always better to start painting whatever materials you have, because that is what it's all about. The first step is just start painting. Also, the problems that you encounter with painting most of the times have to do with mistakes in perception and maybe in color mixing and stuff like that. And not as much in the materials that you use. So therefore also, if you are a bit low on money, if you have a low budget, then don't mind and just buy standard or student quality paints, because they're just great, and it's more important that you just dare to paint. If you buy expensive paint, maybe you get a little bit frightened to use it. And so are all those psychological things, of course. But now let's take a look at the differences on the palette and what it does. I'm gonna put a little bit of student quality burnt umber over here. And I'm gonna put some artist quality burnt umber over here. Now the first thing that you see already is that this paint is more fluid than this one. And well, that's also a matter of taste. Some people prefer more thicker paint and other people more fluid paint. This paint is a little bit more thick, and if you don't like it that thick, of course you can add a slight touch of medium, for instance. But now let's try to compare what happens if I mix the burnt umber with white. Because then I think I can clearly show what happens. So I grab a little bit of burnt umber over here, you see? And I try to do the same amount over here. So that is a little bit difficult, but I think this is about the same amount. This is very scientific, of course. Now I'm gonna add to both of these burnt umbers, I'm gonna add the same amount of white, you see? Like this. Let's see what happens. First I do the student quality. So I mix the two. There we are. Burnt umber mixed with titanium white. Clean the palette knife and I go over to the next one. You immediately see, I guess, I hope, that it makes my point clear. Do you see, if I add the same amounts of paints, how more of the vividness stays intact in that right one, in this one. So you can clearly see that this one contains more pigments than this one. So, and again, it's not to say that this is bad. Of course, if I add more burnt umber, I can get to about the same result. But you see, it costs more paint to get about the same result. I now have used more burnt umber compared to that one. And you see, now it's almost the same. So, and that is one of the things. That's when I started using artist quality paints, is when I realized that to get the same result I needed more of the standard paints and less of the artist quality paints. But now another thing, if you've developed a more nuanced perception, then you get more sensitive to very small steps in changes of color and tonal value. Now, and the thing is, the more pigment that the paint contains, the more easily I can make very, very tiny differences, very tiny nuances. I will show you. If I grab a little touch of white, like this, and I put it over here and I want to alter the color slightly, you see that that can be very easily done. And this is a very, very subtle alteration of the main color. I hope you can see. And this is what sometimes happens in portraits, for instance. Then you have very small gradual shifts in tonal value and color. So with a high pigmented paint I can very easily do that. Now if I add a little bit of white in this paint, then you see that it has way more effect immediately. So it alters the color way more quickly than here. And again, it doesn't matter, I can always add more burnt umber again, of course, to try to achieve the same thing as here. Here I now of course have the same nuance, so it is possible, but here I can clearly, let me show you, I can make very, very subtle color shifts. Very easily. That is because this paint contains so much pigment that it is very easy to only alter it slightly. Here I add a little bit of white and you immediately see, oh, that's a little bit too much. Then I have to control it again by adding more burnt umber. So I add more burnt umber. Chances are that I do too much now. well, this is rather good. But you see, and another thing still is that this one, to me, I hope the camera picks it up, looks slightly duller than this one. Now I put some ultramarine blue on the palette, because this is all very scientific, of course. We do scientific research here. Here I grab a little bit of ultramarine, very high pigmented. But where is my palette knife? Ah, here. And you see, by the way, this kind of palette knife is more of a scoop type of palette knife, and that is very handy for paints like this that come in jars, for instance. And so this is artist quality ultramarine blue, and when you see them next to each other, you can hardly see the difference. So I'll grab a little bit of titanium white over here, and I try to do the same amount over here, all very scientific. So now I'm gonna compare again. So I'm gonna mix this. So this is student quality, and we get a beautiful light blue color. Nothing wrong with it, and the pigment in the student quality is of great quality. No problem. I mean, it is just a good pigment, and also it is light fast, etc. So therefore they're just great, no problem. I clean the palette knife, and now I head over to this one, and let's see what happens. There we are. Now, again, there are two things. It contains way more pigment. And another thing that we see here, ultramarine is a low tinting strength pigment, but we see that it is still rather kind of vivid. And now again, let me add a little bit more white just to show you again, to make differences. And then you can see that especially when the color is already rather light, the steps that I make when I add titanium white are rather big steps. And this one I can very easily control. So I grab just a little bit of titanium white, and you see, I can now very easily control steps in color. So that is handy when you get a more nuanced perception of colors. Now, maybe a lot of people watching say, okay, I don't see that much of a difference, and that is great as well, because in the end, the differences have fine nuances. And so you know for yourself what is best for you. Now there's one color that, if you want to buy artist quality paints, of course it is very tempting to say, oh, I want to buy Pyro Red. For instance, it's beautiful. Of course that's very tempting, but there is one color that I personally think is very handy to have in artist quality. And that is titanium white. That is boring, but why is that? That is because acrylics always dry a little bit darker than what you see on your palette in wet form, especially with lighter colors. And that is because paint consists of binder and pigments, roughly spoken. And binder is the stuff that sticks the pigments to the canvas, or glues them together, so to speak. And the binder dries transparent, so you don't see the binder. But look how acrylic binder looks in wet form. You see, it's milky. Look at this. This is acrylic binder. This is the stuff that is in your paint without the color particles. And this is just like glue. If I leave it here, it dries totally transparent. But you can imagine that if I mix a little bit of this with burnt umber like this, so here, if I have more binder, then my paint looks lighter on the palette. You see it immediately. And in the end, it will dry as dark as we saw before. In student quality paints, that's what happens more than in artist quality paints. Because in artist quality paints, there is more pigment in the binder. And therefore you have less color shift, as we call this. We call this color shift, that the color shifts after drying. And you see it especially with lighter colors. And that is logical, because look at this. If I have burnt umber here and I add it to the binder, it still stays relatively dark, you see? So it matters slightly less than in the lighter colors. Now therefore you can understand that if I use, this is artist quality magenta. If I use standard quality or student quality titanium white, then this titanium white makes my magenta lighter, but it contains a lot of binder in comparison with the pigments. So therefore this light color that I make here, this light magenta, will dry reasonably darker than what I see here on the palette in wet form. And that is hard. If you are painting very subtle variations, then it is difficult that it dries darker than what you see on your palette. And therefore it is useful to buy artist quality titanium white, because if you then make light colors based on with a lot of white, then it will dry a little bit darker than in wet form, but way less. There is the palette knife. And another thing is, in the artist quality paints you have more choice in pigments. And that means that, for instance, a yellow, I find it very handy. I use cadmium pigments still, and I don't know how long they will exist anymore, because cadmium pigments are very expensive, but also very toxic. So, and by the way, always be aware that pigments can be very toxic. Some pigments are less toxic than others. Cadmium, cobalt, stuff like that are very, very toxic, so don't inhale them. Before, for instance, when you sand your painting, I don't know why you would want to do that, but then the color particles, the pigments, you can inhale them, and that is very bad for your health. Don't eat it, don't drink it, and try to avoid skin contact with those paints. But, well, that was a little bit of a tangent, but cadmium yellow, for me, has the benefit that it is very, very opaque. You know that sometimes you want to paint a banana like this, and you want it to be right the first time, the yellow colors, but you know that most yellow colors don't cover that well. Most yellow colors are rather transparent, so you need, so then of course you can first add white on the canvas, then go over it with yellow, etc, etc. But with cadmium yellow, for instance, I can do it in one layer straight away. So that is a benefit of having the choice in other pigments. Now, I hope that was helpful. Thanks for watching. See you next time.